Yo, I'm Kai, I am a chess expert, and today I am going to be showing you 35 different levels of chess difficulty and guiding you along the way. We are going to be given puzzles based on rating. The rating will increase as we get further and further along. First couple ones will probably be around beginner. I'm just going to explain those and then we're going to get into the more complicated ones. So as we can see here, we are in a king and pawn endgame, and if you count the pawns, white has 1, 2, 3, 4 compared to black's 1 and 2. Now, usually in king and pawn endgames, the number of pawns you have does actually matter quite a lot and usually wins you all king and pawn endgames. However, there are some exceptions, and this is one of those. The rule in chess is that if your pawn gets to the end of the board, then you get a new queen. And obviously queens are much more powerful than pawns, and so our pawn is closer to queening than any of white's pawns, and all we need to do is take this pawn and push this pawn, and that'll be game over. Because after we take, yep, that's the correct move. White actually made this move for quite an advanced reason, and I'll show you this after we complete the puzzle. So we're just going to push, and the puzzle should just be completed like this. The reason that white decided to move out of the way is because after this pawn promotes and becomes a queen, white is actually going to be in check. That's actually quite an advanced concept that I didn't think it would play for like a 900 rated puzzle. Okay, so we're in the next puzzle here. What we need to focus on here is how weak white's king is. As you can see, these pawns are creating a nice little barricade in front of the king. So the white king has actually trapped himself in his own pawn. And how we're going to exploit that is by playing queen to c1 check. Now what this does is it forces this queen to come back, because after we take, that is mate. The only other form of defense that there would have been had white moved this knight would be the rook. However, the knight is blocking the rook. So the only piece that can block these checks is the queen, which just leads to a forced mate. Okay, so this one is just pretty simple. This is just a checkmating sequence. It's quite a popular one as well. This is one you should take note of. As you can see, this knight is very commonly placed covering 2 squares around the king. So all we need to do is just give it a check and then bring the queen over to a square that is defended, like here, and the queen is defended, king is in check. So that is just checkmate. We're on number 3 here, and I didn't expect this kind of thing for an 1100 rated puzzle. I mean, this isn't too difficult, but this just, you need to see a little bit more into the game to be able to know that this is winning. The reason this is winning is because white has a bishop and 2 pawns and black has a bishop and 3 pawns. Like I said previously in that king and pawn endgame at the start of the video, usually the amount of pawns that you have matters. However, as I also said, there are some exceptions, and this is definitely one of them. You see, if we trade here, what matters quite a lot in king and pawn endgames is the placement of the kings. Because white's king is far closer to black's pawns than the black king is to the white pawns, what the white king will do is just run in and just collect the pawns. And I'll just like give you a couple of sequence moves here. Okay, let's say for argument's sake, they're going to run after your pawns. We're just going to take. And they could try running here, but we're just going to go here, and after they take. And as you can see, after all said and done, we've got 1 extra pawn. Black can try and, like, I don't know, run in, catch the pawn, but this is just to no avail. Black is losing and white gets a queen. Okay, so we're in number 4 here, and this is just a tactic that's known as a skewer. So what we're going to do here is if we play bishop d4, you can see that we were attacking the king and this rook. Now, obviously, the king is a far more important piece than the rook, because if you lose the king, you lose the game. So what black has decided to do is to block the check, and after this, we actually just take a free rook, because white cannot take back because it's defended by the queen. Okay, so this one here isn't really a mating pattern that you should be aware of, but the one thing that you definitely should be aware of is the fact that this king is very, very weak and around the white pieces. And you can see already that the white pieces are already covering a lot of the squares that the black king can use. And if you can imagine, all we would need to do is give the king a check where all of its escape squares are covered, and it'd be mate. So how we're going to do that is if we play g4. Now that does weaken the h4 square, so black can run to h4. However, as you can see, after king h4, we have bishop g3, which is actually checkmate. He can't take the pawn. He can't go up here because now this pawn covers h5 and the pawn is defended by the rook. So this is a distraction tactic. One thing we do need to be aware of is that this king is defending the bishop. Now, the king defending pieces is sometimes fine. However, because the king can become a weak piece, because obviously if you lose the king, you lose the game, this can sometimes be exploited, and this is one of those cases. So as we can see here, the knight is attacking this bishop, and it is also defended by the king. However, how we can exploit that is if you can imagine we give the king a nice little check here on c7, the king would be forced to move, which means that it is no longer defending the bishop. And even if they try and defend by blocking the check with his rook, we would be able to take, and now the bishop is again undefended. He might block, yeah. So we take, and as you can see, we both have a rook. However, I have an extra knight, and this should just be an easy win. Okay, so this one is actually quite an interesting puzzle, and as you can see here, if we look at white's last move, they've just taken our pawn. And you might be thinking, well, that just looks like a free queen. However, we can't actually take it because the rook is taking advantage of this pin against the king. So this pawn can't actually move because the king would be put in check. So we need to find a way to exploit that. And there is one way, is if we play queen to e1 check, we are not only attacking the king, we are attacking the rook here along this diagonal. However, after check, they can't actually play king to h2. And what you need to be aware of there is after we check, is that we need to pay attention to the fact that this rook is pretty much indirectly defending the queen from being taken. Now, what we can actually take advantage of here is that when we take the rook, it comes with check. When the king is in check, he has to avoid it, take the piece, or block the check. And here, as you can see, after we've taken the rook, it comes with check. You are going to want to take that queen, because if you move the king out of the way, then I'm just going to take your queen, and I'm going to be up a lot of material. So you do want to take that, and then after, we take the queen, and as you can see, we've completed it. And if we count the pieces, both have one rook, both have one knight, but I have an extra rook. And that should just be an easy win. Okay, so this one here is a nice little combination tactic. What we need to be aware of is the exposed king along this diagonal. And how we exploit that is, if you notice, there's a lot of tension along this A file. If we exchange after takes, we're going to have this check. And after we throw in this check, again, like in that last one when we were attacking that king and the rook across the diagonal, instead, what we're going to be doing is attacking the king across the diagonal, and we're going to be attacking a bishop as well. So after we take and check, of course, we've completed the puzzle, and as you can see, we are attacking the king and the bishop. Okay, so this one here is just going to be a simple checking sequence that will probably lead to mate. Again, there's no sort of real pattern here. All it's going to be is that you need to focus on the fact that this king is exposed, and there are none of its pieces are around it. So the king is all on its own, it's undefended, and all we're going to do is give it a nice little check. It's going to run over here, and then all we're going to do after this is just play queen f7. Okay, it doesn't want to finish out the whole line, but what would happen is they would play king h8. This is their only move. And then what we want to do here is quite intricate. We can play a move like rook to f1. And all this does is we're just slow playing, basically. We're saying to black, hello, I'm going to bring my rook in and hurt you. Black has to try and find the way to defend the f6 square. As you can see, there's no completely obvious way other than trying to start giving up some pieces, trying to hold this square. If we take, they take our rook, and that is not good. We don't want that. So what we have to do after knight d7 is actually switch up the attack. We go for g7 a different way. We play knight to e8, going after that g7 square, which will be checkmate. And so black will have to start giving up material, and it will just lead to mate in a couple of moves. Okay, so this one here is just a nice little sequence of a capture and a check that also attacks another piece. And as you can see, after we take the knight on e2, we can bring the queen up to c2, checking the king, attacking this rook. Obviously, they have to move the king out of the way, and then we will have time to then take this rook. So after taking, check, takes, thank you for your rook. Something to pay attention to at all times is the pieces that are undefended, such as this rook. If you're ever playing a game of chess and you feel you have that intuition that you feel like there should be a tactic, always look at the pieces that are undefended. And in some cases, even defended, because there might be a distraction tactic or a deflection tactic or something like that. And let's just move on to the next one. With this one, if you play enough tactics and you just get that feel for what should be played at what time, your immediate intuition would just say, sack the rook. And that actually is the answer here. If black had actually have taken this, we would have taken with the queen, and after king to f8, queen g7 would have been checkmate. So obviously the king has to walk out of the way with king to f8, not taking this. However, what we can do here is actually just take the knight. And that should just be GG, because if you count, black has 2 rooks and a queen. We have 2 rooks and a queen, but also a knight. This one here is actually quite a nice mating sequence, and it uses the concept of a clearance sacrifice. And what that means is that we're going to sacrifice something to clear the way for other pieces to run in and attack something, more often than not, the king. And how we do this here is you need to pay attention to the fact that these 2 rooks are sort of indirectly in contact with each other. If you notice that if we was to move this knight, the two rooks would be facing each other pretty much. They're looking at each other. Another concept to pay attention to on top of that is that our rook here is actually kind of ready to sort of just get active and jump into the fight. If white's pawn here was not there, black would just jump in and start checking the king. That would basically just be game over. And there is a way that we can force this, is if we play the move knight to h3 check, they obviously take the knight. However, like I said, if this pawn wasn't here, the rook would swing in, go for a check, and now this rook is undefended. So of course, what do? We're going to take it. This is just checkmate. This one here is actually a nice queen sacrifice that allows us to win more material a couple moves later. Now, what you need to pay attention to here is that the queen and the king are both on dark squares. Now, more often than not, the knight can actually exploit two pieces being on the same color square. So if you can imagine, if this knight somehow got to e6 and this knight wasn't guarding e6 square, then we would be checking the king and attacking the queen. So the king would have to move and we would take the queen. If the knight wasn't guarding this square, then we would have that fork. You can start to piece together where the queen sacrifice comes in, because the only piece that can actually capture this knight is the queen. So what do? We take the knight and then we hop into e6, attacking the king and the queen, and we take the queen. Now, if we count again, white has a knight and a bishop and two rooks, and black only has two rooks and a bishop. So we have an extra knight. That is just GG. So I'm actually glad this one popped up here towards the end of the video, because this is a very, very common mating sequence that you will find in a lot of puzzles. Now, what you need to pay attention to is the fact that the knight is guarding e8. Now, what we want is to just give straight up mate on e8, but obviously we can't do that because the knight would just capture. There is a way we can force this. What we're going to do is we're going to go all the way up, but we're going to stop one square before e8. The reason we're doing this is we are deflecting the king away from defending the e8 square, because as I said before, what we wanted to do was just give mate on e8, but we couldn't because the knight would take and it would be defended by the king. However, now that the king is away from this square, we can exploit this by playing a nice queen sacrifice, queen e8, and after knight takes, rook takes. It's like the puzzle we saw a short while ago where the king was trapped in behind its own pawns. This is a nice little back rank mate. That is a very common concept that if you want to be a good chess player, this has to come straight away. You just need to see this. You need to see, okay, king, weak back rank. We can give mate if the knight and the king weren't defending e8. This sequence here is so common. You have to get it down if you want to improve at chess. I hope you enjoyed the video. I really tried to put forward all the thought processes and ideas that you should be aware of when playing chess and when going through tactics. If you liked it, please leave a like, subscribe. I would very much appreciate it. I also stream on Twitch like once every 2 months, albeit, but I'm trying to get on it. But please leave a like, subscribe. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.